Good morning to those of you who are joining us from the United States, and good afternoon to those of you who are from Europe. It's great that you've joined us today. Welcome. I'm Marion Devine. I'm Senior Researcher at the Conference Board, and I will be your moderator for today's webcast, which is on the theme of how to shift the focus from individuals to team-centric organisations. And I'll have my guest, Professor David Clutterbuck. Welcome, David.
Hello there.
So before we begin with what I think is going to be a really interesting webcast, I just want to go through the basics of our sort of housekeeping rules and aids for today's platform. So please do ask questions as they occur via the chat box at the bottom left of your screen, and I'll do my best to just weave them into the conversation, and if we can't answer them, we will try to follow them up via emails at the end, or in other ways that we can communicate with you. Do feel free to download the presentation via the file download pod in the bottom center of your screen, and you can have full screen at any time on the PowerPoint or the video, and just click the 4 arrows at the top right of the screen. And we always ask, please do complete the brief evaluation at the end, because we really do appreciate hearing from you, and we always look at those evaluations to see if we can do things better, customize them better for you, our viewers. Share this program with your colleagues. It will be available on demand on our website within 48 minutes. There are those of you as well who are earning credits. So do please type your full name and email address in the space provided, and you do have to keep clicking OK for the 3 pop-ups that occur during the program. You do need to stay online for the entire webcast, because credits are available only for participation in the live webcast. So without any more ado, I would like to shift the focus to an individual here with me, Professor David Clutterbuck. David is, I hope, well known to many of you. Anyone, I think, who follows the world of mentoring and coaching will know David. He was here with us about 2 years ago, and we had a really great webcast with him. And David is not afraid to be provocative, and we did have a great response from the people that joined us that day, really asking lots of questions, and it was great. So I hope we'll have an equally good and lively webcast today. So he is distinguished distinguished principal. Sorry, no. He is David. He's lifetime special ambassador. I've already said to David, his bio is getting too long. He's co-founder of the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, and he's now lifetime special ambassador. He has written some 70 books, hundreds of articles on cutting-edge management themes in talent management, coaching, mentoring. He now has a really strong and I think really interesting focus on team coaching, and also what does coaching mean in the context of teams of teams. He facilitates masterclasses all around the world. So I think we have a great guest with us today. And David, I think that you're on the cusp of doing something very interesting at the moment, because supposedly you're retired, but I think if anything, this phase of your life, you're more active than you've ever been. So what are you up to at this current time?
Life's too much fun not to have lots of different projects, and I have 2 major projects at the moment. One is co-launching with WBEX and Professor Peter Hawkins, the first major research and training organisation for team coaches. So it's the Global Team Coaching Institute is just launched now, and I've also got this wonderful program to create 5 million school-age coaches and mentors, so that the young people coming into the workplace will actually bring with them the skills of being coaches and mentors, something that organizations really struggle to teach managers when they've actually learned so many opposite behaviors.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. So we're going to start our website today, and we're looking at this, how to shift the focus from individuals to team-centric organizations. And David has been doing a lot of work in this area. And I'm thinking that, from my perspective, as someone working with our member companies in the conference board, we're really seeing this shift ourselves, that so many of our companies, whether it's through digital transformation, whether it's through a shift to introducing agile-based working across the whole enterprise, so shifting up and scaling the use of agile teams, whether it's just companies really trying to work in a much more custom-centric way, but they are changing and really trying to organize and perform work through teams and project teams. And they might be very much multifunctional, or they might even involve people outside of your organization, your contingent workers, key people. They might be virtual teams. So we at the conference board have really seen this shift, and we've also seen companies really wondering, how do we manage this? How do we, and not just manage individual teams, but how do we actually, as an organization, manage perhaps hundreds of teams across a global organization? How on earth do we do that? And what does that mean for decision making? What does it mean for how we distribute resources? What does it mean in terms of values and an inclusive organization? So it just raises so many questions. And so hopefully David today will be able to help us. So David, I think that's sort of, in a way, the first question. Tell us a little bit about how you define a team. And I know that you're going to talk about team coaching as well. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so firstly, starting with a team, there are multiple definitions of teams, but what it all comes down to ultimately is that a team is a group of people who have a common purpose and are prepared to make sacrifices in their own tasks and their own ways of working in order to assist their colleagues in achieving the collective task. So it's all about being able to work collaboratively to achieve things, much greater things than they could achieve on their own. One of the big problems that we see is that most of HR practice for the last 100 years has been focused on rewarding people as individuals and developing people as individuals. Executive coaching is a very expensive way of supporting individuals, but we have no evidence. In fact, we have quite the contrary, opposite evidence, that actually, if you create a team full of high-performing individuals, it actually performs at less than the potential of the collective. So we're actually really doing the wrong thing by all of our focus on coaching and developing individuals. It's much better to be moving our attention to coaching and developing the team collectively. And we just did a small survey around this, 1,400 people, line managers, coaches, HR professionals. Every single group recognized the fact that we have to make a major shift from our focus on developing individuals to developing teams. And for me, I think it's one of the ways in which HR can really make a difference to organizations, because the shift to teams means a shift to thinking systemically. And that's something which HR has largely not done. So many of the systems and processes that we have are actually part of the problem, not part of the solution. And now I'm being wedded to things like 9-box grids, for example, which actually are a great way of losing staff. That's all about focusing on the individual. The individual operates and performs in a context, and it's addressing the context that enables us to achieve much more within teams and therefore for the organization.
Yeah, thanks, David. And I think that, this does beg the question, what do you mean by team coaching? Because I think for many of us, we might just think, well, that's just, normal things of team building and team facilitation, or maybe it's just kind of the team leader coaching one-on-one people in the team that perhaps need help or just their developmental needs. So what do you mean by team coaching?
Okay, well, what we mean is something that's much more complex than all of those things. Team facilitation is about helping a team deal with a specific issue. Team building, at its root, is about helping the team build better relationships so that they can collaborate better at a personal level, but it doesn't necessarily affect the processes that the team has. So we've got both of those deliver short-term value to the team, but team coaching actually delivers long-term value because it enables the team or gives the team the skills to coach itself. So it learns how to think systemically, it learns how to think about its issues and become much better at resolving its relational and process and technical issues together. So working with agile coaches, for example, giving agile coaches team coaching skills as well greatly enhances what they can do. And if we put it at its simplest, team coaching isn't coaching the individuals members of a team, although it might include that afterwards. But team coaching effectively is taking a coaching style and a coaching approach to working with a team collectively. So the issues that you address in team coaching are issues that affect the collective performance. And indeed, increasingly now, the key to effective team coaching is to enable everybody in the team to take responsibility for everybody else, both their own and everybody else's performance, learning, and well-being.
Okay, thank you, David. So that really is very different to just one-on-one team coaching of individuals, members of a team. And I guess before we
it's also many times more complex.
Is it?
If you think about the relationships with all the people in a team, you've got 8 people in a team, you've got 56 different relationships just on looking at it as individuals. Then you add subgroups in a team. You've got to somehow, as a team coach, be aware of all of those relationships going on and how they influence the team's ability to perform.
Yes, and I think actually one thing I think is interesting is that the more and more that and I think you've made the point, there isn't enough research about what is a high performing team, and especially research around teams of teams. But I did see that research by Google on its own teams and what made a team successful. And I think the thing that I think struck everybody was Google expected it was who was on the team, the stars, the people that had particular skills, and how they kind of collaborated together. But it wasn't. It was all around the team dynamics and particularly around psychological safety, and it wasn't what Google expected. So I think we're beginning to appreciate the complexity of leading teams successfully.
Well, Richard, the top scoring issue in Google's research was coaching, interesting, or having a coaching style. And interestingly, that had been identified as one of the key issues for team leadership by Richard Hackman, the pioneer in team coach research, on team research and team coaching research. So there's a very consistent message here about the constant development of the team. But also what the key research shows us, and doesn't come out as well within the Google research, is that high performing teams always have a very clear idea of why they're there. So they have a compelling purpose that motivates them. And above everything else, that's the most important thing in team performance.
So David, can I use that as an opportunity to move to your first slide where you've mentioned this thing about a coaching and mentoring culture. So that brings us to culture. Purpose is a cultural thing. So can you tell us a little bit about what do you see as a coaching and mentoring culture? And is it something that you need if you are going to shift to this team-centric organization?
Well, again, what the research tells us very clearly is teams that aren't learning are falling behind. And so having an environment where you're learning and where people are co-supportive, which is the 2 key things that come out of a coaching and mentoring culture, that enables the team to really work extremely, much more effectively. So as we say here, it's the predominant style of managing and working together. And this commitment of growing the organization has to have a parallel commitment to growing the people in the organization. And this collective activity of collective learning, it's not just what the individual needs to learn, it's what does the team need to learn. And individual learning can be part of that, but one of the key tools we now find that we're now using in many, many organizations is having a team development plan. Because you've got a personal development plan, you've got a business plan, but how do you link them together? The linking pin is the team development plan. And
in terms of the question that you yourself raise, do we want a coaching and mentoring culture? Presumably the answer has to be yes. So how can we think a bit about that?
I've actually found a few organisations where the answer is no.
Really?
One of these was a call centre that said actually people don't stay long enough here for us to bother. Now, I think I would have argued with them tremendously, and I went to see another organisation in this very similar organisation, which had taken completely the opposite view, and had actually tried to uh, um, to look at the needs. How do you actually work within the needs of the individual? Listen to what makes people perform at their best. And one of the things they found was that they actually went out and deliberately sought to hire actors. The reason they did this was because actors need money while they're resting between real jobs. And so because they're very good at using voice and so forth, they're ideal people to work in that particular call center environment. And as long as you have the flexibility to say, well, come and go as you need, but let us know, with at least a week's advance knowledge, so that we know that if you're going off to for an audition or whatever. It's that kind of thing where the needs of the individual and the needs of the organisation are constantly being looked at together. And so I think there are organisations that conclude the opposite, that we don't need a coaching culture. I think they're wrong. I think those organisations have a limited future.
I think it would be great if we could hear from our viewers, if anyone does have any views there, or there's a sense of what
Absolutely.
might be some of the barriers. Please do speak to us or share some of your experience with us. That would be absolutely fantastic. So, David,
while we're doing that, I think one of the biggest barriers to a coaching mentoring culture is the fact that so many guys at the top, so many leaders, actually think they've done all the learning they need to, by the fact they've got there. When actually, I loved having the conversation with them. So when you were young and starting out in your career, did you make mistakes? Oh, yes, of course I did. Yeah. Did you learn from them? Yes, of course I did. Yeah. And how much did those mistakes cost you? Well, not a lot, and they didn't cost the organisation much, except for one guy who did put a hole in a super tanker. But basically, and he still kept his job. But basically, they said, okay, so now, do you make mistakes? Well, occasionally. How much do those mistakes cost the organisation? Well,
yeah. Oh, have we lost you, David? Okay, well, I think that we will try to get David back, and I'm sure that hopefully he will be back on the line very soon. But I think I would like to commend all of you. David is a prolific writer, and he writes lots of blogs and some really interesting just pieces. He's a real thought leader. So I do commend you to his website, and that's something that I have been doing. Are you back, David?
I am, yes. So I wasn't sure whether you'd gone or I'd gone.
No, you had gone. I was just commending people to go to your blogs and your website in general, and just to read up on your latest thinking. But sorry, do go on about the chap who when you asked him about the cost of his mistakes, we were left on a cliffhanger there. We never heard what happened next.
Oh, okay. So what's the so this young chap. When he was young, the cost of his mistakes was not great, except for the guy who sank a super tanker or put a big hole in one. But then when they get to a leadership position, we can ask them the same question. Okay, so how much time do you spend learning? Well, I haven't got time for that. I'm too busy making decisions and strategizing and so forth. So do you make mistakes? Well, yes, of course, occasionally, as long as nobody finds out. And how much do those cost the company? And we basically reshape the whole thing, the whole conversation, to say, actually, the more senior you are, the more time you should spend in learning mode. And if you invert that pyramid, that creates a very strong engine for driving the organization as a learning culture.
So, David, I think you've mentioned... Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
You can. I'm not sure if other people can. Great, thank you. So you've mentioned a few times this thing about a systemic approach. So obviously, you have to work at this coaching and mentoring culture and identify the barriers there and the mindsets. But what do you mean about this systemic approach? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, if we start off with a one-to-one coaching situation, it's almost impossible to be an effective one-to-one coach now if you don't have a systemic perspective, because what stops somebody performing in their role is increasingly not their own capabilities or their own attitudes or whatever. It's as much the context. We find that time and time again, a senior manager who can't perform may have actually inherited a team that has a completely different and unhelpful attitude towards change, for example. There was a study of people at senior level, star performers in financial services, moving from one company to another. What emerged was that virtually none of them actually managed to maintain their performance when they moved to the new company. Only when they took with them the team that they had around them in the previous company. So performance is highly contextual, and that's why we need to be able to look at beyond the system, beyond the individual and their issues, to all the things that get in the way or support their ability to perform. Excuse me. So I see you put up the slide here on the systemic approach, and this basically comes from work that we did in a number of organizations, including ASDA, part of Walmart, and the National Health Service in the UK, National Grid, which is in the east of the States. And basically what we did was to go out and ask lots of people, so what happened when your line manager went on to a line manager as coach course? And the answer was, in most cases, well, he behaved very strangely, and we all sort of reacted negatively to it. And after 3 or 4 days, he went back to being normal because it was so much easier for everybody. And so it doesn't stick. And it's because if you change one part of the system and the rest of the system stays the same, the majority of the system will try and force the aberrant bit back into shape. So everybody goes back to where they were and breathes a sigh of relief. So what we're effectively doing, if you just teach one person to be able to coach to the team, everybody else doesn't know what's going on. And so it's rather, I make the comparison of trying to do the tango when only one person knows the steps. There's going to be an awful lot of sore feet. So what we did was to go back and say, okay, well, how can we help a team to really become, within that team? And so the first thing that was important was that the team should all be learning the basics of coaching, but how to be coached and to do coaching. So everybody was coaching everybody, and that included the team coaching their leader where necessary. We also found it was important to think about things over time. So you've got a lot of opportunities to practice and experiment. And what we gave in each company in its own way, created some materials that that allowed it to everybody before their team meetings would do some reading, do a diagnostic, maybe watch a video, but they would do some study beforehand about an aspect of coaching. Then they'd share this and say, how are we going to apply this to the way we work in our team? And it really worked very well for most of those organizations. Another thing that's important is there's a positive psychological contract. People feel safe. And the other thing that we found was if you created time for reflection. There's a wonderful little technique we use in meetings, which is just building the habit of reflecting. Normally, when you have a difficult subject at a meeting, the person chairing the meeting will introduce the subjects and they'll say what they think, and then people may or may not challenge it, but mostly won't. Even if they go around the table before saying what they think, everybody's trying to second guess what they think. So instead, what we do is to say everybody must write down 3 things of the answers to 3 questions, and they have 5 minutes or so to reflect on those 3 questions before they actually speak about them. Question number 1 is, what do you want to say about this topic? Question number 2 is, what do you want to hear other people say about the topic? And question number 3 is, what do you want the outcome, ideally, of this conversation to be? So you go around the table, everybody reads out what they've said. There's no discussion at that point. And when everybody's done that, you start the discussion. Firstly, it takes half the time. because everybody understands where everybody else is coming from. Secondly, it's much more polite and respectful, because you might say, well, okay, I understood, Marion, that you had some concerns about this. Are we addressing those? And thirdly, when you do make the decision, and typically what happens is the person chairing the meeting will go around and say, did you say what you wanted to say? Did you hear what you wanted to hear? Did you achieve what you wanted to achieve? And if somebody says no, well, you carry on. But when you achieve this consensus, it is a real consensus. Nobody's going to remake the decision in the corridors later. This is one of dozens of tools that we've been developing over recent years to increase the psychological safety, so people really can feel they can say what's needed in their team.
I mean, I think, David, from what I've seen and read, psychological safety really, really is absolutely essential. But you're saying these are elements of a systemic approach. But surely psychological safety is very individual to a team and is very much around that team and the team leader. I mean, is that a systemic thing?
Well, the presence or absence of psychological safety relates to contract, the unwritten contract between the team and the leader about how they behave towards each other. And whether it's okay, what's the culture here say about whether it's okay to speak your mind? What happens if you do? And so it's the system of silence, if you like, that happens when there's an absence of psychological safety. And it might be also as part of a wider system in the corporation itself. So if the organization has a culture of fear, you're going to find that reflected in the relationships within the team.
Okay, thank you. And what about you? You were saying that you developed this systemic approach, these principles, with a variety of organizations in different countries and therefore presumably different cultures. Is this something that can translate across cultures and can be used by a global organization in different places of the world?
Yes, we did one study with a major, one of the top technology companies, one of the world's biggest 5, and we looked at in great depth at their highest performing teams. And it was very interesting, some of the things that we found here, a much cheaper version of a piece of research than Google's. And we found, for example, that the leaders of those teams didn't really waste much time trying to manage people. They spent their time creating the environment where people could manage themselves. And I think that was an important part of giving people the confidence that they are the experts in their own area and speak up about that. So that was one of the many factors that we found. We also found that there was a great deal of what we call fizz and buzz. So fizz is the enjoyment you get from the work you do, and buzz is the enjoyment you get from the people you work with.
Right, I like that. So in this slide that you provided, the next slide, I don't know what it's about, but it looks very intriguing, and it's something about flocking and how birds behave. So I just wondered if you do tell us a little bit more about these next slides, and presumably this is part of the systemic approach to coaching in teams.
Well, what we realised is just as you need to get people to collaborate effectively in order to make teams work well, if you can have lots of high performing teams in their own way, delivering great things, but within their own narrow definition of what success looks like. But the system as a whole, the organization as a whole, is performing poorly. We've had teams with, for example, where HR is winning awards, and sales are winning awards. Yeah, this looks like a great company, but the results at the end of the day are dreadful. And this is not an uncommon situation. So just as individuals, a lot of high performing individuals don't make a high performing team, a lot of high performing teams don't make a high performing organization. And it's how do we link them together? And this term flocking comes from what you see when you see a flock of birds in flight. Somehow, almost instantaneously, magically, they all turn and go off in a different direction. Now, if you try to do that with a crowd of human beings, everybody would be falling all over each other. You'd have the ambulances carting away the broken legs and arms in no time. So how do they do it? And so research into this is suggesting that there are 3 key mechanisms at work for these birds. So excuse me. Separation is how there's the distance you keep between your neighbour. So you would never go below a certain distance. It's a bit like the red arrows do, and they're a great example of that in human action. And then alignment. So wherever everybody's going, you go towards the average heading. You have a sense. It's like the sense of purpose in an organisation, because you all know where you're going. If there's a shift if that purpose slightly shifts away, you all know that you're going in the same direction. And so then, and you could do that in the short term, which is the alignment, but the cohesion is really looking to the long term as well. So there's short term purpose and long term purpose. And I don't know if you saw the Sloan Management School report recently that said that less than a third of people on top team and executive committees actually understood what the strategic objectives of their own organisation were. And every layer you went below that, it got worse, that the actual understanding and alignment got less and less. So it's about how do we translate this ability to react rapidly by birds or schools of fish and herds of animals. How do you translate that into something that enables organisations to be much more agile?
And I think that's really fascinating. But this thing of cohesion, I can see again from where I'm coming as a researcher in the conference board, that is so difficult, because, as you say, the results of the Sloan research was pretty shocking, and we also have companies going through massive disruption. A lot of them are still going through digital transformation, and I know from the research we've been doing in agile-based working, having lots of teams in an organisation is really creating some leadership and cultural problems. And I think as well, especially in agile, if you've got teams working very short term, very intense bursts of activity, trying to find out kind of what they're all doing, but also helping them all work together cohesively is such a big challenge. So I think this brings us back. It brings us sort of to this next sort of part of our webcast about teams of teams. And I think this is a fascinating area, David, and I don't think there's that much research into it. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about the challenges of an organisation managing and leading in an organisation where there are many teams, and you've got to get this sort of overview of them.
Yeah, I mean, the term teams of teams comes from General McChrystal from the Iraq-Iran wars, and basically, by getting rid of the bureaucracy in between teams and linking teams up horizontally, what he managed to do was create much faster reactions. So instead of a decision whether or not to send a drone out to blow up a column of fighters, going up and taking several hours to get a decision, and then of course missing them, you could do it almost instantaneously by making it a horizontal structure. And that works to a significant extent. But our organizations are not necessarily as simple as that. And we need to find much more creative ways to short circuit the ways that the organization reacts to what's happening in its internal and its external environment, and particularly the external environment. So working with a bank, for example, recently, you've got a number of branches in a region, and in each branch, a customer comes in with a particular complaint, and that customer will be seen by one of the staff, and they will simply note it down. They might just send a report in, but essentially it's just a one-off. What they don't know is whether customers are coming into all the other branches in that region and with the same complaint. And when all this goes up to headquarters, it's because it's only in that region that things are happening. The data analysis will only show, this is only a minor issue. There are only sort of 50 or 60 people affected by this. We don't need to take it seriously. But in that region, it's a serious issue. And so if we can find ways of making sure that those environmental triggers are instantly communicated, or as near instantaneously as possible, then we can start to help the organization react more quickly at a localized way. So it's the birds around you in the flock rather than the whole flock. But also and see the impact of that swiftly upon other flocks, because that issue that was bothering some clients in your customers in that one region may well be just the tip of the iceberg, something that's going to happen and spread to other regions. And having one region that's dealt with it and has come up with the answers is a tremendous competitive advantage.
So
I hope that makes sense.
Well, yes, and if anyone has any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Please do fill in the chat box. And I guess, David, again, from knowing some of your work and that you've shared with me, you've sort of said that a big sort of an active barrier against this congruence is that, even when you have lots of teams, at some stage, often that vertical structure comes back into play, and communication starts going down this vertical structure with someone in a team going into another team, and decision making flowing down and resources flowing down, and etc. So tell us a little bit about the principles, and I think you call them the streams of connectedness, to help you manage in this a team-based organization.
Yeah. So there are two issues here. There's the issue of streams of connectedness. There's also an issue about how we define leadership, but let's come back to the leadership one later. So you see, we've isolated through our research 6 streams of connectedness. We think there are probably quite a few more. Signals the birds watching what everybody else is doing besides them, and where they're going. So you get a sense of somehow we're constantly monitoring what's happening in the teams around us so that we don't bump into them, but also so we're collecting lots of information instantaneously. So the idea of all the teams coming together to create the collective vision is fairly straightforward. It's fairly obvious. What tends to happen in organizations is the vision is projected down from on high. Everybody is supposed to interpret it in the way that it makes sense for what their task or part of the task is within the organization. But that leads to silo thinking. And so there's an intermediary step, which is actually saying, okay, how do we come together on a frequent basis just to test how the vision needs to be adapted and adjusted to see how the way that team A fulfills the purpose actually supports the outcome, the part of the purpose for team B, and vice versa. So it's looking at how do our behaviours and our processes actually enable not just our team to deliver, but the entire system of teams around us. And typically we find within an organisational structure, you've got a number of teams who may not be linked horizontally, as in the McChrystal situation. They may be dotted at all sorts of levels in the hierarchy, and so it's not a simple system. And then the informational collective intelligence. This is the issue about the customer arriving in a bank with a problem. How do we actually make sure that everybody gets to, or every team gets to the opportunity to comment on this? And a simple way of doing this is to have somebody in each team whose responsibility is on a daily or weekly basis to say, what exceptions did we see? What are the interesting things we saw that happened during the week? Let's capture these. Let's share these amongst the team. And my responsibility is to do that. And I have a sub-team of people who I share that information with once every week or twice a week. The point with that is that information is now being pulled together, and you can see quickly patterns and trends so that you can react to them, if not in real time, in short time. And then the resources. We frequently find that one team has got loads of work to do, and the other team is actually really running around saying, how can we get everything done? We don't have the resources to do it. So being much more flexible in the moving of resources around within the structure. And again, having people, the connections between people within the team so that you can make those negotiations. Then the invention. An idea comes up in one part of the organization. How long does it take before that good idea is disseminated to other parts of the organization? I think one of the things that somebody, an HR director, told me a little while ago, they were looking at where innovation came from in the organisation, and he said time and time again, we find something that an innovation that we go out and we bring in from another organisation. We go and search for it in the conference board files or whatever, and then we find that somewhere in our organisation there's somebody who's been doing this for ages, but we didn't know about it and it wasn't disseminated. And we could have used their expertise miles before. And then the voice. Now this is like Me Too. You know, if people feel that they're not going to be listened to, if they feel that that there's something that's wrong or needs addressing, but nobody else shares their enthusiasm, how do they get that voice? And so linking them together again through a website, through different ways in which people can actually raise dissent. And create subgroups. When you get a number of people together who have the same issue, suddenly that you, instead of being an individual, you're a group, and a group has voice. And then regrouping. How do you change the structure to make instantaneous new teams? You know, typically it's through loads and loads of negotiations. But as you said in the agile team environment, yeah, we can actually do this quite rapidly by allowing people to follow their interests. And so, what's the new issue that we need to address? Who's interested in taking part in this? What negotiations do we have to do in order to give them the space to do that? And these are just some of the streams of connectedness we found.
Thank you, David. And I think that, sorry, everybody, with the chat, I'm just looking at it now. I got rather pulled into David's. Some of you are sort of saying, but how? So looking at these streams of connectedness, and presumably, David, you have to try and have all those streams all together. Have you come across in your research of some really good ways, practical ways that companies have created these streams of connectedness?
Well, I think we've still yet to do the experiment with an organisation to really try these things out. And if anybody that's listening would like to be part of that experiment and try to create a network of teams and build these streams of connectedness, find others, and look at how we actually apply these principles to making the organisation faster moving, more truly agile. Then we'd be delighted to work with them on that. I think that's something we have to do as soon as we can. But the key we've seen is little bits of this are being done in all sorts of places. We haven't seen anybody that's taking the whole concept and really trying to do it as one as one coherent way of speeding up the interaction within the teams, making real teams of teams.
Do you think technology might have some answers here? You know, I know that companies are moving to cloud-based and very powerful, perhaps AI-based platforms, and some of these are around helping ideation, as they call it, and innovation across different groups. I mean, do you think some of those could actually have these help with the streams of connectedness?
Well, I think what we're going to see is AI in multiple forms becoming the additional member of the team, and taking on a lot of these functions. An AI can listen in on conversations that happen and draw all sorts of conclusions. We're working at the moment on looking at psychological safety in teams, using AI to listen into the conversation and identify the level of psychological safety so that we can get an accurate measure of it, rather than people just saying, well, trying to protect themselves by saying, oh, it's all right here. But actually to really accurately measure the level of psychological safety. That's an interesting project.
Yeah. I'm just going to start. All right, we've got some other questions as well here. How do you recommend teams that have disparate responsibilities to cope?
Sorry, can you say that again, Marion?
Yeah, there's a question here. Some of the questions are going back to team coaching.
Yeah.
So one question is about what are examples of what a team would coach each other about, and another sort of linked question is, how do you recommend teams that have disparate responsibilities? How do they learn to coach each other when they don't support the same parts of a system or the same clients? So people with very, very different.
Okay. Well, let's start with the second one, and then you'll remind me what the first one was, because I've forgotten already. But the second one was that's what happens when you get old. The second one, I'll give you a real example. I'm coaching a team in a university. And what we have is the heads of HR, of facilities, of security, of property, etc. So they've all got their own silos that they operate in, but they all report to the same senior executive. And a new person coming into that role says, okay, we've had team meetings, and at team meetings, everybody sits there, and the old executive or leader with the team would have a two-way conversation with each one of them while everybody else went to sleep or played on their mobiles. A waste of time, the meetings mostly. So they threw all that stuff out and said, when we have team meetings, it's all about what is the extra added value that we can bring that we ask interdependent. Gradually, as they realized they could bring things that were concerning them, worries that they had, things they were trying to work through, and use each other as sounding boards and coaches. And so we had 5 or 6 sessions before we got to the point where it was quite clear they didn't need me anymore. What happened then was one of them had a psychopath in the team, or sociopath to be more accurate. And this person had finally been, but they managed to start the discipline process with this person. And they'd immediately gone on sick leave. And in the university, you get 3 months full pay on sick leave. And then when you come back after 3 months, it goes down to half pay. So this individual, surprise, surprise, suddenly got better exactly on time to come back before her pay would go down to half pay. So everybody in the team is saying, this person mustn't come back, it's terrible. And the poor team leader is wondering, how is she going to deal with this manipulative employee? And everybody else said, that could have been our problem. Now, we have a responsibility to try and create a policy around this, but also to support each other. So how do let's create some rules, some ways in which to support you. So they agreed that every meeting that she had with this sociopath, one of the other team members would be there to support her. They also agreed some very practical rules, like never have a meeting with a sociopath in your office because you can't walk out as easily. And if you do have a meeting with them, always have an agenda. And then, very basic rule, the first time they go away for the agenda, say, sorry, that's not on the agenda, let's get back to it. Second time, you say that again. Third time, say, if you go away from the agenda, if you can't talk to the agenda again, I'm going to close the meeting because you're obviously not prepared to talk about this issue. And I'm going to put that in the record. And that's exactly what they did. The great thing in that team and so many other teams was that once they really got going, as a team coach, they forgot I was there. They'd learned so many of the coaching behaviors towards each other that they were able to operate without me. And I love the feeling of being able to get up from the table, stand by the wall and observe, and nobody notices. And I go and stand at the back of the room and nobody notices. I go and stand in the door and nobody notices. Even outside the door, eventually they notice, and I come back in and say, do you really need me anymore? And this is I think that is the high point of being a team coach.
Yeah. So in a sense, the question about how do you encourage and enable everyone on a team to take responsibility for everyone's performance, it's very much around really making sure that initial thing that you were saying about coaching, to helping the whole team understand what coaching is, and that part of that is their responsibility to each other, and I guess the benefits that brings. Is that a sort of a fair summary of what you've been saying?
Absolutely. And the job of the team coach is to help the team have the conversations that allow them to be honest with each other and to share their expectations of each other.
Just we're sort of getting a little bit short of time, but I've got these great questions. Just can you give another example, David, when it comes to team coaching? Someone's asked for what examples of might be of what they could coach each other about. What have you seen? What are some of the suggestions?
It's almost anything that's a worry for people. In one example we had, this was this was a financial services company, and the regional directors across this particular country would come together once a month for a meeting that they hated. They Basically, the meeting was supposed to last 3 hours, and typically they would last all day, and a lot of things would not get resolved. Nobody looked forward to them. They made one simple change. Before they started the meeting, and it usually they began with breakfast with an hour and a half of co-coaching. Each of them would bring the things that they were worrying about, the baggage they might bring into that meeting, and they would talk it through with their colleague. Maybe there's an issue they wanted to share with the rest of the team. And they would talk that through with the colleague. But what happened was the meetings actually did only take 3 hours after a while. Everybody started looking forward to them, and the quality of the decision making was far, far better.
Thank you, David. And I think that you did touch on a team learning plan. What might that look like?
Well, essentially, you take everybody's individual development plan and you look into one level and say, well, what do you need to learn to be more effective and support your colleagues and deliver the purpose? But you also look at what does this team need to learn in order to be able to deliver what the stakeholders need. And then you look at the gap between them and you say, okay, so what's the collective learning that happens? How are we going to make sure that happens? And I think one of the critical questions for all teams is, how do you know whether you're behind the curve in terms of learning and adaptability and being able to adapting fast enough to keep pace with the environment that's changing around you, or whether you're on the top of the curve or whether you're behind the curve. So you're behind, in front, or on top. How do you know? And when we start investigating this, almost all teams find that they are actually behind the curve.
How do they get ahead?
I'm sorry?
So how do they get ahead of the curve?
Oh. Well, the first thing is to spend more time in learning mode. So if you've got a team learning plan, you can say, okay, so what would our team need to learn and be able to do to be a disruptor rather than to be a follower? What challenges or assumptions can we challenge about the way that we do things every couple of months, for example, every 3 months at least? What of our beliefs do we need to revisit and challenge? What would the most effective competitor be doing or thinking right now? The competitor we don't even know of. What would they be doing now to disrupt us? And so forth. So it's really thinking much more imaginatively and spending more time thinking about what might happen and how we could prepare for a much wider range of eventualities than making the assumption that we all like to make, that things are just going to go on the way they are.
I think this keeps coming back to your point about the need for reflection, need to build in that space for teams, which is a big challenge for companies because, so many companies have teams of people who have got too much to do in the time allowed. We have another question from someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we find that very few executives ever do any thinking at work. They do their thinking when they're commuting to or from work, or when they're lying awake at night unable to sleep because there's too much going on in their head.
Yeah, I think people will recognise that, definitely. We have another question. Someone's asked about, you talked about a coaching and mentoring culture, yet we've spoken mainly about coaching. How would you describe mentoring in this context?
Well, coaching addresses performance issues primarily. It's very much about how do we do things, how do we achieve the skills that we need to do things. Mentoring is much more personalized, if you like. It's much more holistic. It's more about how do we grow the individual and help them to become wiser. In fact, the origins of mentoring all lie in Athena, the goddess of wisdom. So mentoring, what mentoring does is to provide a longer term perspective on the learning that an organization and the people within it need to have.
Thank you, David. One of the earlier questions, which I think I slightly phrased incorrectly, was when we were talking about this organization of a team of teams, the question is, so if you've got very different teams, are you sort of saying that they need to learn to coach each other in that system? And if so, if they're very different teams working at different parts of the system or with different clients, how does that work?
I think you have to experiment. If you treat everything as an experiment and say, what can we learn from these other teams? Then then if every team goes out on learning expeditions, then you're going to find something, even if the team is completely different and has completely different responsibilities in the organization. I think it's one of the experiments I've wanted to do for a while. We've never done fully, but if you take the most hated department in the business, if we can put it, which is well, depending on the business, is usually purchasing. What is it? That used to be, if you go back 30 years, the most hated department used to be HR. Then IT came in and compliance, all sorts of other people took over that role. But how do you actually manage to build the relationships with your internal stakeholders? So there's a lot that HR can teach the purchasing department about that. So I think across silos that we could do so much more. I'm being very controversial there, but just stirring it up a bit.
Well, you've only got 4 minutes to stir people, David, so you've left it a bit too late.
Oh, okay, well, let me stir them with one other thing then, which I think is fascinating. We talked about moving from individual to team. We've been doing. I spent months trying to find any good empirical research that's told me what leaders actually do. We found hundreds of thousands of articles on the traits and qualities of leaders. But the functions of leadership really struggled. So eventually we found one with 15 different characteristics of a leader, of the functions of a leader. And then we've been taking these around the world and asking teams of coaches, teams of managers, how many of those actually need to be done by a designated authority figure? And the answer is just 2. One of those is to get sign off on resources from above. So you do need somebody in that authority role to do that. The other one is protecting the team from interference from people outside. If the cap fits there, you can wear it. But it's all about actually protecting the team so the team can get on with its work without interference. Everything else we've been able to identify pretty much can either in large part or totally be passed over to the team to do. And that includes hiring, it includes appraisal, even sort of working out bonuses. The team can have if the team gets involved with those things, the system works far, far better.
Well, David, I think that is definitely the subject of another webcast. But I think that just brings us to your final point that I think you did want to talk about today was the nature of leadership then in a team-based organization. Obviously, leadership is quite different, and I think you describe it as distributed. So could you just tell us in a nutshell very quickly what this does mean in terms of leadership?
I missed that at the end. Could you give that to me again?
So how would you describe leadership in the context in this team organization?
Okay, so leadership is a distributed function. Increasingly, it's leadership is too important to leave to individual leaders. And if we look at, we can find examples of heroic leaders, people who achieved amazing things. Usually they're deeply flawed individuals as well, but somehow they manage to achieve something wonderful. I mean, Elon Musk would be an interesting character study there. But for every heroic leader that produces great things, there's a whole plethora of heroic individual leaders who lead organizations and societies to disaster. I think that's the issue. We have to get away from this idea that leadership is all about an individual. Leadership is increasingly and collectively a collective activity. And if we're going to resolve some of the big issues around the world, from climate change to poverty, we have to have much more collective leadership.
Well, I think that's all we have for the time now. We do have one question, David, about your reference to this piece of research on leadership functions and authority.
Yep.
If we can,
I will send you up, Marion, a short description of this, so that you can distribute it.
Thank you. Well, I'm afraid that's it. We have no more time. But David, thank you so much for, as usual, being very lively and provocative and thoughtful. Thank you for sharing with us your research in this area. It's a big area, and I think very interested to hear from our viewers if they want us to follow up on any of the themes that we have touched on today. Please do tell us, suggest this to us, and we'll have a look into it. But David, thank you so much for your time today, and it's been
Yeah.
really great speaking to you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, Marion. And if anybody wants to, if anybody wants to just this, because we publish also, we're always publishing blogs and things around this. If anybody wants to be on that to receive that constant research that we're doing, please just link with me on LinkedIn, and that's fine. We'll make sure that you get all of this continuing studies and literature.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. Please, people, remember that we have our evaluation sheets. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for all the questions that you posed today, and it's been really nice being with you. Thank you, David. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you, everybody, too. Bye then.